Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This morning, we're going to continue where we left off in our reading and discussion of this book, The Global Vatican. The Global Vatican. You want to know what this New World Order is about? The title tells you. The Global Vatican. The self-styled King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The papacy. That's what the papacy has always insisted that it is. The King of Kings, yes, your president, no matter who he is, must submit to the ultimate authority of this man in Rome. And this book, from page to page, is admitted evidence by a devout Roman Catholic, an ambassador to the so-called Holy See. It's an open admission that the papacy controls U.S. foreign and domestic policy. And not only that, but there's such a cozy relationship between the United States and the Vatican that it appears in many instances where there's very little difference between the two. They're on the same page. And not only does the papacy control foreign and domestic policy for the United States, but we're now talking about the papacy's control over this Cairo conference. Now, it has to do with abortion. And language in this document that was produced at this so-called Cairo conference, which is simply to state overall goals for this jurisdiction. And it contained language that permitted abortion. And to give the public impression that the Vatican is truly anti-abortion, the papacy insisted that the language of these documents be changed and that abortion would be written out of this legislation. Now again, I don't care what side my listeners are on regarding abortion. Okay, that's not the issue here. The issue that we're talking about is the Vatican's influence. Okay, the world is being broken up into, the North American Union, the European Union, and various jurisdictions, and rules and laws are being made, and the Vatican is asserting itself. This is a demonstration that the papacy does not control just foreign and domestic policy for the United States, but global policy. This is global policy. Now, retreating one paragraph from where we concluded yesterday, we're reading the first full paragraph on page 171, if you're following along in your own copy of the book. He says, prior to the Cairo conference, an early draft of the, quote, program of action, unquote, had circulated among attending delegates. Included in this document's article was a guarantee of the right of, quote, unquote, pregnancy termination. Okay, that's the term they use for abortion and contraception. This is setting policy for the Cairo jurisdiction. And it says the Clinton administration not only supported this, it was one of the draft's key sponsors. And I pointed out yesterday that Bill Clinton was just like all the other kings of the earth. He must answer to the papacy. Bill Clinton, a Jesuit-trained papist, was taking a position that seemed contrary to the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, he supported this program of action which allowed for pregnancy termination in the Cairo jurisdiction. First of all, you got to ask yourself, what business does the President of the United States have in meddling in the Cairo conference? Because it's ultimately going to be a global government. Okay, a one world community. There's not going to be any national sovereignties. And so they're doing all this right out in the open in front of everyone's eyes. You're going to give up your national sovereignties. You're going to be thrown into a global jurisdiction that's broken up into various regions. And the papacy, at this point, Bill Clinton seemed seemingly to be opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, but the papacy wants this language to be changed for Cairo. All right? He says Ambassador Flynn himself was himself offended by the measure. That's Roman Catholic Ambassador Flynn. And he says, a devout Catholic, he was faced with a personal quandary. His duty to the president versus his personal convictions as a Catholic. Okay? Here's a prime example of what effect it has upon you and me and all the people of the earth, including Cairo, when a Roman Catholic serves in American government. Okay? This ambassador, a Roman Catholic, is now between a rock and a hard place. He's sworn to serve the president and represent the United States of America in the world and to the Vatican. And President Bush is pro-abortion, and the papacy appears, at least, to be anti-abortion. So who's this ambassador going to obey? His president, the United States of America, according to his ambassadorship loyalties, and according to the oath that he swore when he took the position? Or is he going to obey the Pope? Now again, if you get, let your mind wander into whether or not abortion should be legal or not, you're missing the point. We're talking about the influence of the Vatican on Roman Catholics in our government. This is what's important. We can talk about abortion another time. Let's talk about what influence the Vatican has on this Roman Catholic ambassador who is supposed to represent Bill Clinton in the United States of America and admit something against his conscience. This Roman Catholic conscientiously objects to abortion. His papacy, his Lord of Lords, look, every Roman Catholic must assent to the spiritual and temporal power of the Pope. Okay? They don't call him Holy Father for nothing. Comprehend, I mean, if you're a Protestant or evangelical, whatever you want to call yourself, you're just not used to seeing, giving so much authority and ascension to another flesh and blood human being. I mean, you've been brought up in the Bible. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. There's none righteous, no, not one. Okay? So your mind never dwells on the papacy. You probably never give the papacy a second thought. You might think, well, he's a funny-looking little old man, and he carries a really wicked-looking stick, an emaciated Jesus all crumpled up on a bent and broken cross, and he shuffles around in little red shoes and a long white dress, and people kiss his ring. I mean, it's really funky, But what is he to me? Why do I care? Well, you better care, all right? This book is demonstrating what effect this funky little man in Rome has on Roman Catholics in our government. All right. Ambassador Flynn himself was offended by the measure. A devout Catholic, he was faced with a personal quandary. He was faced with a moral quandary. All right? It says his duty to the president versus his personal convictions as a Catholic. Quote, I found myself between a rock and a hard place, unquote, Flynn would later write. Quote, representing the Clinton administration on the one hand, but agreeing with John Paul II, my holy father, on the other, unquote. Now, as ambassador, Flynn had little choice but to do as instructed by the Clinton administration. Still, he tried to warn the administration that the abortion clause at the Cairo conference was bad policy and bad politics. So again, you see the United States and the Vatican factoring in on legislation being passed for Cairo. Now, what would you think if it finally suddenly dawned on you that the Vatican has everything to say about policy for the United States of America? Now, most people would just, in an attempt to protect their own psyches, would just walk around that discussion, see? I mean, we're United States, we're sovereign, we're powerful, we're Christians here, we're not, we're going to maintain our sovereignty. You don't have any sovereignty in the country anymore. The United States is not the United States we were brought up to believe in when we were in grade school and high school and college. It's altogether different. Okay, what they teach us in the schools is completely contrary to actual reality. The United States is no more sovereign than the man in the moon. Okay? The United States answers to the papacy. And so does Cairo, and so does Europe, so does the Australian continent, so does South America. The whole world answers to the Holy See. All right? Flynn had little choice but to do as instructed by the Clinton administration. Still, he tried to warn the administration that the abortion clause was bad policy and bad politics. He also tried to arrange meetings of top Clinton officials, including Ambassador Albright, with leading Catholic clergy. Imagine somebody trying to arrange a meeting between Clinton and the a Protestant pastor. Think the Catholics might be outraged? Well, the Protestants believe that the Pope is the Antichrist. We can't have him talking to the President of the United States and influencing him against the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That's anti-Christian to a Catholic. But it's okay. It just seems to fly right over the heads of the American people when the President of the United States is encouraged to meet with Roman Catholic clergy, the Council of Bishops, the papal nuncio from the Vatican to the United States. That just doesn't seem to matter to people. All right. He also tried to arrange a meeting of top Clinton officials, including Ambassador Albright, with leading Catholic clergy, hoping the administration might hear the Catholics' concerns. They're not interested in hearing about the Protestants' concerns. They want the president to hear about the Catholics' concerns. Is that okay with you? And what if the president agrees with the Catholics' concerns? Do you know what historically has been one of the major concerns of Catholics throughout the world? That Protestantism be destroyed. that no more people exist in the world that claim that the Pope is the Antichrist. The papacy is the Antichrist. They're heretics. They must be annihilated and exterminated and extirpated and tortured and imprisoned. Their children stolen, their property stolen. They must become third, fourth, fifth class citizens. We must even deny them a Christian burial. Okay? That's the historic papacy. That's historic Roman Catholicism. They want to make the President of the United States listen to the Catholics' concerns in this country. It says the White House was not interested. The White House was not interested? You better believe Bill Clinton was interested, and he was communicating with the papacy secretly, while openly, through these ambassadors and priests and everything else, there appeared to be a conflict between the Clinton administration and the papacy over the subject of abortion for the Cairo conference. Look, I've already said the Vatican had supported, or rather financed, the creation of the abortion pill. The French company that devised it. It was public. See, the Vatican preaches the sanctity of life, but they are primarily interested in population control, especially if that population control, is free and accessible in Protestant or heavily Protestant influenced nations. Okay, it's all about demographics to the Pope. And Clinton was demonstrating the true policy of the Vatican. Now the papacy, knowing that policy is going to rule the day, abortion is going to be legal, abortion is going to be financed by tax dollars, abortion is going to be easily available, population is going to be controlled, Protestant babies are going to die, stands publicly and denounces abortion. Now, 5 months before the Cairo conference, Ambassador Flynn was contacted by Archbishop, now Cardinal, Jean-Louis Tiron, then serving as Secretary of Relations between states at the Vatican. Remember, that's the section of the Vatican that primarily deals in the relations between the various states in the world. You know, if a conflict arises between, say, the United, I'm just picking this out of the air, the United States and Germany, well, this is the organization within the Vatican that will analyze those differences and try to resolve those differences. See, the Vatican's controlling foreign and domestic policy. In this case, foreign policy. It has a fixture within the Vatican that deals with relationships between the nations. Okay? King of Kings and Lord of Lords. This is global administration. It's a fixture at the Vatican. All right. Tiron told the ambassador that the Pope wished to speak to the president directly about the Cairo proposal. The Pope wanted to speak to the President of the United States directly about the Cairo proposal. He says the Cardinal then walked Flynn through the Apostolic Palace to the Pope's private chambers, where the Pope gave Flynn the message himself. The personal touch indicated just how much this matter meant to the Pope. Indeed, John Paul II saw the Cairo conference as a defining moment in his papacy. Okay? A defining moment for the papacy was the Cairo conference. And he says the inclusion of pro-abortion language in the conference's program of action constituted a moral catastrophe, he believed. Okay, this is for public consumption. And it says it amounted, in the Pope's word, to, quote, a United Nations plan to destroy the family, unquote. Oh, how wonderful. The Pope's defending the family. Is that consistent with history? Is that consistent with history? Has the Pope always been a defender of the family? All the books that I've read say that the Vatican spends special effort getting control of the woman in every Catholic house, because she's the tender-hearted one. She's the one that will seek out the Roman Catholic priest. She's the one who will confess the sins of herself, her children, and her husband. And the priest will weep with tears over her situations, will console her and coddle her and get her heart, win her heart, and he, in effect, then becomes her husband. She confides in the priest and does not confide in her husband. She answers to the priest. She's subject to the priest, not subject to her husband. And so the family is divided. And if the priest wants to control the husband, he simply makes suggestions to the wife. And all of a sudden, the husband feels more and more and more alienated, and less attached to his wife, and she spends more time in the confessional box of the Roman Catholic Church than she does in the privacy of their own home with her husband. And pretty soon, she becomes so morally attached to this priest that she begins to openly defy her husband. Does the papacy historically support the family? What if a little child goes to confessional and the priest asks various questions, which they are instructed to do, and the priest asks the child, "Do your parents read the Bible at home?" "Well, yes, they read the Bible." "Which version?" "Well, they've got a couple." "Well, they've got many." And the priest would say, "Well, is the King James Version one of them?" "Well, yeah, I believe we do have a King James Bible. And they read out of that one mostly." So the priest comes out of the confessional box believing in his heart that they're secretly Protestants. They're Protestant in their beliefs. And now all of a sudden, the priest of the Roman Catholic Church tries to access more and more and more relationship with the child, and the child, without his knowledge, is ratting on his parents, implying that they may be heretics, they may be Protestants. First thing you know, there comes a problem in the family. So a father decides to correct his child in a forcible way, and all of a sudden the state shows up and accuses the father of child abuse. And the state, to protect the child, since they are so protective of the family, they take the child and put the child in state custody, which just happens to be delegated to a Roman Catholic nunnery. See what I mean? Does the Vatican really defend the family? Oh, they stand up publicly and say, "Oh, the family that prays together stays together." Of course, that implies the rosary. If you pray the rosary together, which God clearly forbids in the Scripture, but privately, through the civil power, they control the family. They divide and conquer the family. They separate the men from the women and the children from the parents. Historically, the Roman Catholic Church has an ingenious system of destroying the family and bringing it into subjection to the priests of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, I'm not just making this up. If you're a long-time listener to Inquisition Update, you've heard me read the books yourself. Okay? So the papacy stands in defense of the family, and this so-called United Nations, which is really the global governing institution for the Vatican, is tearing down the family and promoting abortion. So what side is really the papacy on? It's not hard for me to determine. I hope my listeners are getting a clue. We'll be back right after these messages. Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you would like to support Inquisition Update to help keep this program on the air, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Look, if I had to pay for my airtime here, I'd have to walk. My operations are no budget. I take nothing for being here, and I give nothing for being here. This is a mission of love for me, and I know it is for Nicholas too, but he's the one that pays the bills. And so help him out a little bit, will you? I mean, we don't fly around in jet airplanes, okay? We don't have big hair and fancy suits and diamond rings on our fingers and preaching Jesus while serving Satan, okay? And while there still remains a modicum of religious liberty and freedom of speech here in the United States, while there is yet a modicum of freedom of religion and freedom of speech here in the United States, you need to support this work. Because there's going to come a time when the truth will be outlawed. And our voices are going to be silenced. History is going to repeat itself. The beast has come back to life. And the ancient horrors of the Dark Ages are going to revisit us because there's no more protest. So let us protest while we may. And please support this work. Now back to the book. The cardinal then walked Flynn through the apostolic palace to the Pope's private chambers, where the Pope gave Flynn the message himself. The personal touch indicated just how much this matter meant to the Pope. Indeed, Pope John Paul II saw the Cairo conference as a defining moment in his papacy. The inclusion of pro-abortion language in the conference's program of action constituted a moral catastrophe, he believed. It amounted, in the Pope's words, to a, quote, United Nations plan to destroy the family. You're given the impression that the Pope is against the United Nations, when in fact the United Nations is the secular power, the civil power, that imposes by force secret but true Vatican policy. And the Pope stands publicly in apparent opposition. All the world is a stage. The Pope must maintain the appearance of a Christian leader, while through his civil power he is a diabolical, killing monster. That has been demonstrated all throughout history, and the United States is an instrument of that horror. So is the United Nations. Now, the people fawn over this Pope because he's the defender of the faith, when in fact he is the instrument of the wickedness in this world. And he simply uses the civil power to do his bidding and sheds away the blame, so that the people continue to fawn at his feet and seek him more and more to defend their rights. You would think that after 1800 years, humanity would finally have comprehended what role the papacy plays in the world. The Protestant reformers understood it. What happened to that understanding that the Protestant reformers had in our generation? They've simply hidden the truth. A truth that was widely known during the time of the Protestant Reformation. Now, it's hardly even considered. And those who consider it are incredulous about it. All right? Look, ignorance is not bliss in our case. We must return to the Protestant understanding of what this papacy is in the world. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the one who deceives the whole world, the one who reigns over the kings of the earth. He's got a golden cup in his hand, full of the filthiness of abomination. It's the Eucharistic cup, the golden cup. He's decked in scarlet and purple. That's the color of the bishops and the cardinals. Okay? Arrayed in scarlet and purple. Decked in gold, silver, and precious stones and pearls. That's the incalculable wealth of the Roman Catholic Church. Look, Revelation chapter 17 paints a picture that is unmistakable. And all of this was understood at the time of the Protestant Reformation. The message that we're teaching here on Inquisition Update was far better known at the time of the Protestant Reformation. The papacy was completely destroyed for all intents and purposes because of the widespread knowledge and understanding of the Bible in this regard. That's what's missing. And that's why the Pope now commands so much power. The deadly wound has been healed. History is going to repeat itself if we do not recognize who has deceived us and for what purpose. All right. It says Flynn went back to Villa Richardson and immediately called the White House to pass along the Pope's request. Then he waited and waited for the president to respond. After 3 days and numerous attempts to prod the White House, Flynn, embarrassed and frustrated, got on a plane and flew to Washington. He took a cab directly from the airport to the White House, where he planted himself in the West Wing and waited to see see President Clinton personally. Then he went back the following day and waited through the morning. Finally, on the afternoon of the second day, he was called into the Situation Room to meet some of the president's staff. With considerable effort, he convinced the group that the president had to respond to the Pope. If President Clinton did not want to talk about Cairo, fine. But he couldn't just ignore the Pope's request for a call. Is that okay with you? That the President of the United States cannot ignore the Pope's request for a confrontation. What if it was a Protestant in the White House at that time? What do you think would have happened if a Protestant president were in Clinton's shoes at that time and simply absolutely refused to make any contact whatsoever with the Pope? What do you think the consequences would be? There have been repeated times in history when kings would not obey the Pope, would not give him his ear. It resulted in war. It resulted in that king or potentate or queen to be overthrown off of their throne and beheaded in some cases. It even led one king, King Henry IV of Germany, to walk across the Alps, stand barefooted out front of the Vatican, waiting for the Pope to entertain his capitulation. Barefoot in the snow. He and his family. 3 days waiting. The Pope finally let him in. And what did he do? He placed his papal foot on his neck. Now, we're led to believe those days are over. But listen, this ambassador is telling Clinton administration officials If Clinton doesn't want to talk about the Cairo conference, fine, but he can't just ignore the Pope's request for a call. Sound familiar? It is familiar for those who have read and studied before. He says President Clinton finally placed a call to Pope John Paul II, and Ambassador Flynn flew back to Rome. His persistence did not materially change anything, and of course, it wouldn't change anything. And it surely cost him a great deal politically inside the Clinton White House. But it was the right move for the diplomatic relationship between the two sovereigns. Let me ask you, in all of this, where does the wants and desires of the American people fit in? They don't. They don't. If the President of the United States serves the papacy, he certainly is not serving the people of this country. If the people of the United States insist on sovereignty, then the President of the United States cannot have secret or open relations with a papacy that calls himself the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and by divine right, the Vicar of Christ. All right? This is a Protestant understanding. It's almost absent in this country today. Children coming out of the schools today are all on the side of globalism. A global community where nations must submit to a global authority to prevent war, to prevent starvation, to prevent natural catastrophe. It's those of such goodwill that control the world today. And who stands at the apex of this global government but the very man of sin we are warned about in the Bible? And they make it seem so hopeful. They make it seem so mystical that man has finally evolved into a truly human and truly moral entity. And the Bible preaches nothing like it. That's the New World Order. To exchange Christ for Antichrist. To literally kick Christ out of his throne and put this man in it. President Clinton finally placed a call to John Paul II, and Ambassador Flynn flew back to Rome. His persistence did not materially change anything, and it surely cost him a great deal politically inside the White House, but it was the right move for the diplomatic relationship between the two sovereigns. Even as the Pope worked to change Washington's mind about the Cairo platform, he pursued other tactics to defeat the abortion measure. Top Vatican officials, including Archbishop Turan, were dispatched across the globe. There goes your shadow government, the emissaries of the Pope, the priests. And it says, as the papal emissaries pressed the Pope's case, the Church found allies not just in predominantly Catholic and Christian countries, but in Muslim countries as well. Quote, it seems one of the most important aims of the conference is to facilitate sex, to undermine its passive consequences, and to encourage the use of condoms to prevent the transmission of diseases caused by illegal sexual relations, unquote, said Sheikh Mohammed Al-Ghazali, a world-renowned Islamic scholar expressing a concern shared by many of his fellow Muslims. Well, now you have the Muslims and the papacy on the same side, don't you? How ecumenical. He says the lead up to Cairo was, in the words of George Weigel, quote, another example of first world countries imposing their policies on and their understanding of morality on third world countries, using the threat of decreased foreign assistance as a weapon, unquote. The United States can impose economic sanctions on other nations if they don't do what the Pope really wants. Never mind what he says in public. I mean, if there's one thing you have to understand by now, listening to Inquisition Update and the reading of this book, the papacy's position publicly is diametrically counter to the true but secret policy of the Vatican. All right? And we have the United States imposing economic sanctions and depriving foreign aid to countries that won't go along with the New World Order. Okay? This is what they did in the Dark Ages. If you were determined to be a heretic according to the papacy, then you couldn't get a job. Okay? Your cattle and your land were taken from you, if you had any in the first place. Your house was taken. If it wasn't burnt to the ground, it was given to someone else. And you literally starved to death. That has been the papacy's power all throughout its history. The power to impose interdiction, even if that's necessary, to close all the churches. Okay? For all those people convinced that God can only be found in the churches, salvation can only be found in the churches, when Christ doesn't dwell in temples made with hands anymore, then they can close the churches. You can't get your baby baptized. And if your baby dies, why, he goes to purgatory. Limbo now, they call it. But the United States is the applier of this financial pressure upon third world countries. It imposes its will, which is the papacy's will, upon third world nations that are not agreeable with the papacy. And where they find common cause, they even strengthen that obligation. Okay? I mean, look, the clock ticks left, the pendulum ticks right, but the Pope's minute hand advances always in the same direction. Closer and closer and closer to global supremacy. The United States is helping. He says, but this time, instead of compliance, it found resistance and resentment. Among the harshest critics of the proposal were women delegates like Benazir Bhutto of Pakistan. These women perceived that the so-called right to abortion was anything but liberating. It could easily be turned into a coerced obligation in which mothers were pressed by the state to abort their children for the sake of quote-unquote population control, all under the aegis of the UN decree. Now it's starting to make sense, doesn't it? You entertain the Pope's reproductive laws, it gives license for the state, which is the instrument of the Pope, to not just give you the right to abort your children, but to mandate that you abort your children for the sake of population control. Because the God of all creation, when he told man to be fruitful and multiply to fill the earth, was an idiot. He didn't provide enough air, enough water, enough firewood, enough coal, enough oil, enough water to sustain us. You see how the preacher of the Roman Catholic Church does? They profess Christ, but they denounce him and belittle him and blaspheme him in every way possible. If they can't do it through the front door, they do it through the back door. That church is irreformable. It was prophesied by Daniel and Paul and John. It has fulfilled its prophetic role in the world, and it will continue to fulfill its prophetic role until Jesus Christ returns. And in the meantime, God's people lie in the balance between Christ and Antichrist. And if we don't stand up and take a stand, I wonder if Jesus is going to be able to even recognize us as his. There's many of us who say, Lord, Lord, have we not done this or that in thy name? And Jesus said, I never knew you. Who are you? You want Jesus to know you? I do. So the abortion clause, do you suppose the papacy wants the civil power to be able to mandate abortion in certain places in the world? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm implying. That's what I'm saying outright. That's what I'm saying flat out. Isn't that what you would expect from the man of sin, son of perdition? To give the beast the civil power, the power to cause you to abort your own children, or to haul you into a hospital under duress and under protest and take that child from your womb without your consent. That's what they do in China. The Pope stands publicly opposed to it. But that's the policy. He says opposition to the abortion proposal began to gel. When the 9-day population conference opened in Cairo in early September, what had once seemed as an assured victory for representatives of the developed West turned into a rout. The vote went against, and new language was inserted into the Cairo document. Quote, in no case, read the final draft, should abortion be promoted as method of family planning, unquote. Now, let me ask you the question. Did the Pope win or lose? The Pope can claim victory anytime abortion is discouraged. That maintains his public image. And the Pope just works underground secretly to make sure abortion is legal everywhere. And it puts the onus of that wickedness on the civil power and protects the public image of the papacy. All right, Cairo was a sweet victory for the Pope and the Vatican, and one of the reasons Time magazine named John Paul II as its 1994 Man of the Year. Few people on earth, the editors of Time concluded, carries as much influence as he did. Ambassador Flynn was certainly pleased. Quote, I've always thought of politics as the art of compromise, writes Flynn. During the Cairo controversy, though, the Pope showed me that sometimes when morality is at stake, there can be no compromise, no way to bring people together. All you can do is try to persuade them to do what's right and pray for them if they don't. Oh, isn't that all so lovely? The papacy's the Man of the Year. 1994 Man of the Year. Lauding Antichrist. The public image has just been grossly enhanced. The whole world fawned at his feet. The Roman Catholic Church appears to be the defender of the family, the defender of human rights, while it is in fact the fomenter of war, death, and destruction. And we must recognize the truth about the papacy. This is the counterfeit Christ. He's a phony, a diabolical phony. That's all we have for Inquisition Update today. We'll continue with our reading and discussion of the Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, on the program tomorrow. Please pray for me. Please support First Amendment Radio. I'll see you tomorrow.